Hello everybody and welcome to this video. It's part of a brand new series where I'm looking at what the 2017 AQA English Language and English Literature GCSE exams teach us about the 2018 onwards exams. What do I mean by that? Well, up until the summer of 2017, these exams had never actually taken place. They were brand new and everybody, teachers, students, parents, we were all trying to understand what the exams were going to look like. Now we've gone through one series of exams. That's really, really useful to us because all of the data from the hundreds of thousands of students who sat the exams is brought together. Common misconceptions, common weaknesses, common strengths are brought together in AQA examiners' reports. And what I'm going to do in this series is really just point out some of the most important things we can take from what happened in 2017 and talk about how they can help us in 2018 and onwards. So whenever you're sitting your AQA exams. So I'm going to go through the paper question by question. And the first thing I will say is I'm really delighted to say that my approach to all of the questions has stood up and been absolutely validated. And you'll see if you go to mrbruff.com/exam success, you'll see hundreds of messages that I've received from people who got amazing grades and improved grades and all of that kind of thing. So do make sure you watch my AQA English language playlists because everything in there is still my approach to these questions. This is just the kind of additional information on the top. And the other thing to say is that my guide to GCSE English language and my guide to literature and most of my guides are now available in paperback on Amazon for £6.99, so do check that out. So I want to start with paper 1, question 1. Now paper 1, question 1 is literally the exam board's easy opener. I mean, it is supposed to be a low challenge question that sort of just gets you going, which is quite interesting because paper 2 question 1 seems similar but is actually quite tricky. But paper 1 question 1 is as simple as it sounds. And what have you got to do in this question? Well, I'm sure you know you have to read a certain section of the source and pick out 4 things to do with a certain topic. And you can write them in your own words, or you can use direct quotations as long as those direct quotations make sense. You can paraphrase, whatever you want to do. It's a 4-mark question, so the expectation is that this is just going to take you 5 minutes. Now, this is a nice, easy question, but there are a couple of ways that you can go wrong. And the examiner's report shows us the average mark for this question was 3.75. Now, what does that mean? That means that, well, it could mean lots of different things, but one way of looking at it is this. If there were 4 students, out of every 4 students, one of those students dropped a mark. So, you know, it could be that out of every 4 students, the first 3 got full marks and the 4th got 3 marks, dropped an easy mark. Now, it could also mean that out of every 16 students, 1 student got no marks. I mean, there's different ways of looking at it. But the point is, in 2017, 513,000 students sat the GCSEs. And this means that something like 125,000 students dropped a mark in this question, which is absolutely crazy. And I'll tell you why it's crazy. Because a mark lost here on a question where you're just looking at a source and picking out 4 bits of information and, you know, circling the right part of the text and then writing out 4 things like this, a mark dropped here is a mark that you've then got to gain somewhere later in the paper where it's a lot harder to achieve the marks. Now, these were the boundaries for the 2 papers combined in 2017. And what I want to point out to you here is that the difference between one grade and another is not always huge. So if we have a look at the difference, for example, between a 7 and an 8, okay, so a 7 is in line with the traditional A grade and an 8 is perhaps more like the A star. The difference between a 7 and an 8 is 9 marks across the 2 papers. So let's say you drop an easy mark in question 1, paper 1, and an easy mark in question 2, paper 1. Actually, that could be 2 easy marks that push you quite a lot further towards the next grade. So let me point out how people drop marks, because the examiner's report points out 2 things, and I have to say my videos already preempted these issues, but I just want to make them clear to people who perhaps haven't seen those videos. The first thing that people did to lose marks in this question is they didn't take the information from the set lines that were given. You see, the question directs you to a particular part of the text, and as you'll see, this is a screenshot from my revision guide. The idea is that you should put a circle or highlight a box or whatever around that section of the text to make sure you find your answer from within there. Because if you were to find your answer, for example, down here, you would not get a mark for it. Now this sounds so simple, doesn't it? If you've got to look between certain lines to find your answer, you think, well, of course I'm going to do that. But the fact is, this is the first question in the first exam, and you're going to be going in there, your adrenaline racing, you're panicking, you're perhaps not reading the question properly. So be aware that in 2017, the average mark was 3.75 out of 4. That means that, or it could mean, for example, that one person in every 4 dropped a mark. So be aware that you do not want to be that student, and you want to make sure that you look between the lines that are given. And the easiest way to do that is put a circle around them. The second thing is that a lot of students overcomplicate this question. This is an easy AO1 question. Okay, so if we just look at this example, because I think it's going to be useful to explain this. List 4 things from this part of the text about Frankenstein's creature. Okay, and what you do is you look through and you say, okay, his limbs were in proportion, his skin was yellow. You just pick out obvious things and you write 4 obvious things from the text. His skin was yellow, his hair was black, his teeth were white, his eyes were watery. The other way that people went wrong with this question, according to the examiner's report, was to do with this idea of trying to interpret the text. It was better to retrieve information, to just find the answers, to find simple answers like you see here on the screen, than to try and kind of interpret or infer something from the text. So what do I mean by that? Let me try and give you an example. So you want to try and find 4 obvious, simple answers in the text. There's no point in kind of overcomplicating it. So for example, you could say, let's have a look at this bit. His shriveled complexion. So you could just write as your answer, he had a shriveled complexion. Okay, and that would be fine. Where people sometimes go wrong with this question is they try to make it harder than it is and try to infer something from the quotations. They say, okay, he's got a shriveled complexion, so I'm going to write, he looks old. His skin looks old. And that's not actually what the text says. And actually, the challenge here is don't overcomplicate this question. Just find obvious, explicit bits of information in the question and in the source, and don't overcomplicate and try to interpret or infer, something from those details. So it is a simple question, but a shocking 1 out of 4 students dropped a mark in this question. And the way to avoid that is to make sure you're reading from the correct lines by putting a big circle around the section of the text which the question is based on, and to make sure you choose 4 obvious points. Don't overcomplicate and try to infer or interpret from what you're looking at. If you found this video useful, please do subscribe to the channel. All of this information and more is in my revision guide, so check that out, link in the description below.